remember the night clearly because nothing about it seemed strange at first. It was late autumn, one of those quiet, cold nights when the roads feel empty and the air feels heavier than usual. I had just finished visiting a friend in the countryside and was driving home alone. The road was long and dark, surrounded by fields and patches of woods, and every few miles there would be an old farmhouse or a broken fence barely visible in the headlights. My truck hummed steadily as I drove, the heater blowing warm air while the radio played quietly in the background. I wasn't in a hurry. It was close to midnight, and I knew the roads would stay empty all the way back. The sky was clear, and the moon was bright enough that the fields on both sides of the road glowed faintly silver. I remember thinking how peaceful it felt, like the whole world had gone to sleep except for me. I had been driving for maybe 20 minutes when I saw something ahead on the side of the road. At first I thought it was just a mailbox or a post, something standing near the ditch. But as I got closer, my headlights caught the shape of a person. I slowed down without even thinking about it. Standing there was a woman. She wasn't waving her arms or trying to flag anyone down. She was just standing still on the gravel shoulder facing the road. As I rolled closer, I noticed the way she was dressed. It looked like traditional clothing, long fabric that draped down past her legs, and bright patterns that caught the light in a strange way. It wasn't something you usually see someone wearing alone on a rural road that late at night. For a moment, I considered just driving past her. Something about the scene felt odd. There were no houses nearby and no other cars around. But then she turned slightly toward my truck, and I saw her face in the headlights. She looked calm, almost tired. And there was something about the way she stood that made me feel like she had been waiting a long time. I slowed down and pulled over. Gravel crunched under my tires as I stopped a few feet ahead of her. I rolled down the passenger window and asked if she needed help. She stepped closer slowly, her movements quiet and careful. When she spoke, her voice was soft but clear. She asked if I could give her a ride to her village. I remember hesitating for a second because I didn't know of any village nearby. The area was mostly farmland and scattered homes. But I figured maybe she meant a small community down one of the back roads. I unlocked the door and told her she could get in. She opened the passenger door and climbed into the seat beside me. As soon as she sat down, I noticed how cold the air inside the truck suddenly felt. The heater was still running, but the warmth seemed to disappear. I closed the window and started driving again. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. I asked her where exactly she needed to go, and she pointed forward down the road. Her hand moved slowly, almost carefully, like she didn't want to make sudden gestures. I glanced at her again. Up close, her clothing looked older than I first thought, like something from another time. The patterns were colorful but faded, and the fabric seemed heavier than modern clothes. Her hair was long and dark, falling over her shoulders, and her expression never really changed. She just looked straight ahead at the road, as if she already knew where we were going. I tried to make conversation to ease the strange silence. I asked if she lived far away. She paused before answering, and then said, "Not very far." Her voice sounded calm, but distant, like she was speaking from far away, even though she sat right beside me. I asked if someone had dropped her off earlier, or if her car had broken down. She didn't respond right away. After a moment, she simply said she had been walking. That answer made the situation feel stranger. Walking out there at that hour would have taken miles to reach anything. But I didn't press the question. The road continued straight for a long stretch, and the only sound inside the truck was the engine and the tires rolling over pavement. Every so often, I noticed the temperature inside dropping again, even though the heater was still blowing warm air. I rubbed my hands together and turned the heat up higher. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the woman sitting perfectly still. She hadn't moved at all since she got in. Her hands rested quietly in her lap, and her eyes stayed fixed on the road ahead. After several minutes, she lifted her hand again and pointed toward a small road that branched off to the right. I slowed down and turned onto it. This road was narrower and darker, surrounded by trees that blocked most of the moonlight. My headlights cut through the darkness, but the woods felt thick and quiet. We drove along that road for what felt like 5 or 6 minutes. I expected to see houses or lights ahead, but there was nothing except trees and open patches of field. I started to feel uneasy. Finally, I asked if we were close. She nodded slowly and pointed again, this time toward an open area ahead where the trees thinned out. I kept driving until the road curved slightly and opened into a wide, empty field. The moonlight spread across the ground, and I could see tall grass moving gently in the wind. There were no buildings, no lights, nothing that looked like a village or even a single house. The woman spoke again and asked me to stop there. I pulled the truck onto the gravel shoulder and put it in park. I turned to her and asked if she was sure this was the right place because I didn't see anything around. She looked straight ahead for a moment without answering. Then she said quietly that this was where she needed to go. I remember feeling confused. I started to turn my head toward the field, trying to see if maybe there was a small road or path I had missed. It took only a second. When I turned back toward the passenger seat, the woman was gone. The door was still closed. The seat was empty. For a moment, I thought maybe she had opened the door without me hearing it. But when I looked down, the lock was still in place and the handle hadn't moved. My heart started beating faster. I quickly opened the door and stepped out of the truck. The night air felt cold against my face as I looked around. The field stretched out in every direction under the moonlight. There was no movement anywhere, no footsteps in the grass, no sound of someone walking away, nothing. I walked around to the passenger side and opened the door. The seat was empty, and the fabric still looked perfectly smooth, like no one had been sitting there. I stood there for several seconds, trying to understand what had just happened. I even walked a few steps into the field, calling out to see if the woman was nearby. My voice echoed faintly across the open land, but there was no reply. The longer I stood there, the stranger everything felt. The air seemed colder than before, and the silence felt heavy. Eventually, I climbed back into the truck and closed the door. My hands were shaking slightly as I started the engine again, even though it had never been turned off. I sat there for a moment staring out at the empty field where she had asked me to stop. There was still nothing there. Finally, I put the truck in drive and turned around on the narrow road. As I drove back toward the main highway, I kept checking the passenger seat out of habit, half expecting her to somehow be sitting there again, but it remained empty the entire time. When I reached the main road, the familiar open landscape returned and the feeling of unease slowly faded. I drove the rest of the way home without stopping. The whole experience felt unreal, like something from a dream. By the time I reached my house, I had almost convinced myself that maybe the woman had quietly stepped out when I looked away, and I simply hadn't noticed. But that explanation didn't make sense. The door had never opened, and there had been nowhere for her to go without me seeing her. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The memory stayed clear in my mind from the way she stood on the roadside to the moment the seat beside me became empty. Later that afternoon, I mentioned the story to an older man who had lived in the area for most of his life. When I told him where the road was and where I had stopped, he grew quiet for a moment. He asked me to describe the woman again. I told him about the traditional clothing and how calm she had seemed. When I finished, he nodded slowly and looked out toward the fields. He said that many years ago there had been a small community not far from that exact location. According to him, a young woman had died while walking home along that road late one night. After that, some drivers claimed they had seen a woman standing alone, asking for a ride. Each story ended the same way. The woman would ask to be taken to her village and then disappear before anyone could see where she went. When he finished telling me that, I felt a chill run through my body. I never drove down that road again late at night, but sometimes when I pass the highway that leads toward it, I remember the quiet ride and the moment when the passenger seat suddenly became empty. Even now, I can still picture the moonlit field where she asked me to stop, and the strange, calm expression on her face as she pointed toward a place that no longer existed.